Hi, I'm Mary Beth Gilliam, and this is the Outperform Cancer podcast, where we discuss actionable anti-cancer strategies found in peer-reviewed scientific research. If you've been finding value in this podcast, the best way to support it is to follow the show, leave a comment or rating, and share it with someone you care about. You can also visit outperformcancer.com and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date. Now, listen up. This may be the most important episode I've ever recorded. Today, we're talking about the immune system and cancer vaccines. Every day, your body produces millions of abnormal cells, tiny genetic mistakes that, if left unchecked, could become cancer. But for many of us, nothing happens. Why? Because your DNA has repair systems, and your immune system is constantly patrolling, finding and destroying threats before they get out of control. When cancer does take hold, it's often because your immune system has missed something, or it couldn't recognize it as dangerous. But what if we could train the immune system, like a coach trains an athlete, to seek out and eliminate cancer cells, even the ones trying to hide? That is the promise of cancer vaccines. Today's guest is Dr. Nora Disis, one of the world's foremost experts in cancer immunology and vaccine development. We dig into how these vaccines work, who they're for, and why cancer vaccines are the fastest growing area in clinical research for cancer today. After speaking with Dr. Disis, I have one clear takeaway, and that is, if you have cancer or have ever had cancer, now is the time to search for a cancer vaccine clinical trial. Personally, I'm already scheduled to meet with a doctor at MD Anderson to talk about a trial for me. And right now, on clinicaltrials.gov, there are over 100 cancer vaccine trials in the US actively recruiting or preparing to open. These studies include melanoma, breast, prostate, lung, pancreatic, bladder, kidney, lymphoma, leukemia, head and neck cancers, and more. So there's a really good chance there's a trial that might be right for you. Dr. Disis is world-renowned. She's the endowed professor for cancer research at the University of Washington and director of their Cancer Vaccine Institute. She holds several patents in the field of targeted cancer immunotherapy and immune-based diagnostics. She's also an American Cancer Society clinical professor and editor-in-chief of JAMA Oncology, the cancer journal of the American Medical Association. These are just a few of her amazing accomplishments, and today she brings us clarity, urgency, and real hope to a topic that is often misunderstood and yet potentially life-changing. So let's get into it. Join me in welcoming Dr. Nora Disis. Welcome to Outperform Cancer podcast, Dr. Disis. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's good to be here.
I'd like to just start right off with acknowledging that a lot of patients hear the term cancer vaccine and they think that it's preventative. So they think that since they have cancer or have had cancer, that it may not apply to them. Can you start us off and just explain the difference between therapeutic vaccines and who would be eligible or should be considering and thinking about cancer vaccines moving forward?
Sure. In fact, cancer vaccines really started as what we would call therapeutic vaccines. So they would be actually administered to patients with cancer. It's only recently that we've been giving cancer vaccines to patients who haven't had cancer, although we have been giving cancer vaccines directed against viruses that are associated with causing cancer to patients who haven't had cancer for a very long period of time, like HPV vaccines for cervical cancer. But we're now starting to give cancer vaccines directed against kind of classical cancer antigens that aren't virus antigens against in patients who don't have cancer. That's a relatively new thing. But for years and years and years, we've been giving therapeutic cancer vaccines. So for everyone out there, most cancer vaccines are actually given to patients who have already had cancer. Now, people might think, why do we do that? I mean, we don't give infectious disease vaccines to people who have the infection. And I would imagine that those are much more strong vaccines than cancer vaccines, because those vaccines target foreign antigens that really seem dangerous to the immune system. And of course, cancer vaccines are targeting cancer antigens that may not appear that dangerous to the immune system, because cancer kind of grows in us. It's part of our self. And that's true. That's one of the reasons why cancer vaccines have kind of struggled a little bit, because we've had to figure out how to make them appear more dangerous or foreign to the immune system. But one of the other things we've learned about giving cancer vaccines to patients with cancer is that when cancer is growing kind of out of control at a point where you would need something like chemotherapy or radiation therapy to whack it down, that probably isn't the best time to use a cancer vaccine. And in the past, people would test cancer vaccines for efficacy in situations where patients had been through everything, their cancer was kind of progressing, and then as a last resort, they would use the cancer vaccine. Mm-hmm. And that is probably the absolute worst time to ask your immune system to get involved in trying to control cancer. So these days, what most cancer vaccines are being used for therapeutically is once patients have gone through treatment and there's no evidence of disease, you can't see the cancer anymore, but their risk of recurrence is high. So we suspect the cancer's in there somewhere. That is a perfect time to try to tweak the immune system to be primed to recognize those cancer cells, because unlike chemotherapy, the immune system can travel anywhere in your body, to the bone, to the brain, to any tissue. And if it is primed correctly, it will kill until every single cancer cell is dead. And that's what we hope we'll get from cancer vaccines in the therapeutic setting.
That's very exciting, especially it's very exciting for me. I am HER2 positive metastatic breast cancer patient that's in remission. I don't have evidence of disease. And one of my questions was, what would be necessary to have to create the vaccine for a person like that? Do you have to have tumor tissue? Does it have to be genomically sequenced? Do we need that information before you could move forward with a vaccine for someone?
There are lots of different ways to make a cancer vaccine. What you're talking about, genomically sequenced or using patients' tumor tissue, probably one of the most common types of vaccine that use the patient's tumor tissue is creating a mutation-based vaccine, where you do sequencing on the tumor tissue, you look for all the mutations that have occurred in that tumor tissue, and you construct those mutations into a vaccine in a variety of different ways. It becomes a personalized vaccine for that patient's specific tumor, and you immunize the patient. Now, the reason why people are taking this type of approach is that those mutations appear foreign to the immune system. The immune system hasn't been exposed to those mutations before. So in a sense, those mutations can function kind of like an infectious disease antigen. So they appear more dangerous to the immune system than, let's say, an overexpressed protein like HER2/neu that's not mutated. Now, on the flip side of that, you need lots and lots and lots of mutations to be able to find a mutation that can be recognized by the patient's immune system, because the way your immune system recognizes proteins is really dictated by genetics. So those mutations have to be chopped up and presented to your immune system in a very specific way. So you may chop up and present a piece of a protein that doesn't necessarily include that mutation. So you need lots and lots of mutations to be able to get one that would be able to be presented to your immune system. And that's why these personalized vaccines are able to work well for, let's say, patients who have melanoma or certain types of lung cancer or colon cancer, because these are highly mutated tumors. Now, something like HER2, that's not a mutated protein. And there are many cancers, like most breast cancers, that are not highly mutated tumors. So there's not lots of mutations that you would be able to choose a bunch of mutations to put into a personalized vaccine. But there are many different ways that you can make a non-mutated protein like HER2/neu appear dangerous. One of the ways that we found was within the natural sequence of these non-mutated tumor antigens are small portions that can stimulate a very inflammatory response. And if you can identify those portions, and we use artificial intelligence to do so, you can kind of make vaccines that appear foreign to the immune system. Another method you can do is take what's called adjuvants. These are immunologic substances that you combine with a vaccine, and these adjuvants can take proteins that aren't very immunogenic and make them highly immunogenic. So over the years, we've learned a lot of tricks or a lot of vaccine engineering where we can either make mutated antigen vaccines or take these non-mutated proteins and make them appear more dangerous to the immune system. So for both patients who have highly mutated tumors or patients who have low mutation tumors, we still have the capability of making vaccines that can create very high level immune responses in the patients.
That's fascinating. So I want to just touch on something I think just to make sure that some patients that might be listening understand. Would you mind just defining what an antigen is, just so they're clear? And then if you could talk to why the HER2/neu that we were talking, HER2 positive, is not considered a mutation. I know it's found in other places in the body. How does that play a role? Just if you could clarify that for people.
Sure. Okay, so an antigen is a protein that stimulates an immune response. So a protein in your body or a protein that enters your body that would cause the immune system to react. and we just make up another name for it instead of saying immunogenic protein, because that's too long to say. We call it an antigen.
Okay, so an
And
antigen is anything that is going to stimulate the immune system.
right,
Okay,
in a specific way.
in a specific way.
Right,
And you mentioned HER2 because HER2 is in our bodies already, right? For
right.
even for people who don't have cancer.
Right. You have proteins that are in every single cell. And these many proteins, when your normal cell becomes a cancer cell, these proteins become abnormal in some way. They can be overexpressed, and that's how HER2 becomes abnormal. So instead of having just a little bit of HER2 in the cell, like you have in lots of cells in your body, suddenly you have a lot of HER2 in the cell. So it's not mutated, it's not altered. You just have a ton of it. Simply going from a little bit to a ton of it triggers the immune system.
Okay.
The immune system understands that there is something wrong here, and it begins to recognize HER2, and HER2 becomes an antigen. Okay. So we used to think cancer patients didn't have immune responses to their cancer, but now we know almost every cancer patient has an immune response against their cancer. The problem is the immune responses aren't the type of immune responses you need to kill your cancer. The immune responses are kind of antibody responses that just are a marker that say the immune response has recognized it, but isn't really trying to kill it because it's recognizing something is wrong, but the antigen or immunogenic protein is too close to self.
Okay.
So it's not triggering the immune system to make a tissue destructive response because the immune system is smart. It doesn't want to cause autoimmunity.
Yeah. Right. So what I'm hearing you say is that you kind of need a bigger target on its back.
Yes.
That it's like, hey, I know this isn't so great, but the immune system's not going to go after a cancer cell unless it really sees an antigen that says, hey man, I don't belong here. I'm really wrong.
Right.
So your cancer vaccines that you're creating and that you see coming down the pike are either amplifying in some way the difference or creating a difference. And so it has that bigger target.
Right. Most cancer vaccines have some method attached to them that make the immune system see that as dangerous, have a trick in them that cause that immune response to be a killer immune response.
So I'm fascinated by this because it made sense to me in my head that you could use the overexpression of something like HER2, right? Because it's a thing. I can imagine it. How does it work for triple negative breast cancer when there's an absence of this? It's, you don't have the estrogen or progesterone, or you don't have HER2. How do you do a vaccine for that?
Well, for example, we have a vaccine for triple negative breast cancer that is a multi-antigen vaccine against multiple upregulated proteins involved with breast cancer stem cells.
Oh.
Because triple negative breast cancer is a very STEMmy type of cancer that undergoes what's called epithelial to mesenchymal transition or early metastases, very early in its growth. And one of the benefits of all the research that's gone into cancer genomics is you have the genomic profile of thousands of subtypes of breast cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer. you can literally pull down data and create multi-antigen vaccines that will give you enough antigens to, target most of that subtype of cancer that you're aiming for, kind of the way they put together the flu vaccine every year.
Wow.
So vaccine technologies have really advanced, and cancer genomics has catapulted the field to the extent that we're able to identify proteins that are involved in driving the biology of the disease, and with high throughput technologies, rapidly assess whether those proteins are immunogenic or not.
Wow, that's really incredible.
Yeah.
So, I was going to ask you whether there are certain types of cancer that seem more responsive to a cancer vaccine. But given what you've just said, it really seems like it's kind of almost flipped question, which is, so are there vaccine strategies or types of antigens or mutations that we've explored that are more effective than others?
Well, what I can tell you is this. We've immunized every subtype of breast cancer with a variety of different vaccines. HER2/neu vaccine, StemVac, which is our 5-antigen vaccine targeting breast cancer stem cells. We've immunized patients who have HER2/neu positive breast cancer, triple negative breast cancer, hormone receptor positive breast cancer. There is no difference in the level of immunity breast cancer patients achieve when we look at patients who have stage 3 or stage 4 breast cancer when they've been immunized in a complete response or bone-only disease. So I can't say that hormone receptor positive breast cancer patients don't respond immunologically when I look at their T-cell response in their peripheral blood after immunization, or the same thing with triple negative or HER2. They all generate high levels of immunity after immunization. What we're still testing is whether that immunity will translate into protection. Now, that's a more difficult question for a couple of reasons. Number one, you can run a vaccine study and measure an immune response on a grant, but running a larger study, like a randomized phase 2 study to test clinical outcome, is 10 times more expensive. And the type of funding we need to run those studies is very rare. So you have a lot of people who are developing cancer vaccines where you can get that type of funding, but then they all funnel into the 2 grants a year where you can get enough money to do a randomized phase 2 clinical trial. So that is where the holdup is for breast cancer vaccines. The $5 million grant that it takes to test clinical efficacy. The second problem, unfortunately, is in our most common breast cancer, which is hormone receptor positive breast cancer, because the length of time it's going to take to prove the point in those patients is a long, long time. And there is no grant funding that will last the 10 years it's going to take to prove that a breast cancer vaccine can prevent disease recurrence in hormone receptor positive breast cancer. That's a big undertaking. That's like a government type of undertaking. And because of that, unfortunately, people have very much shied away from doing any vaccine development for hormone receptor positive breast cancer, the most common breast cancer we have, because the clinical path forward is not there. You can develop the vaccine, you can test it's immunogenic, you can show that it's safe, but then what do you do?
It's heartbreaking because it all comes down to money. and
Right.
I won't go into, we could spend hours, I'm sure, talking about the current environment and the challenges, the new challenges that face researchers today as funding cuts are hitting as we speak. And so,
But even before the current environment, vaccine research has been a struggle
mhm,
because how do you develop a drug where you get 3 shots that cost $30 each and then a shot a year for,
yeah.
there's no pharma company who's interested in that
Yeah.
endpoint. you know.
So I guess so this is interesting because it gets to thinking about research a little bit differently and thinking about, how much risk people are willing to take. So, if you have foundational research and then you have like early trial research and you understand the mechanism of action and you've shown it in other cancers or in other subtype with other subtypes that maybe respond earlier and in shorter periods of time, uh, what's preventing us from just moving forward without the 10-year, giant trial? Like, at what point can we just say, it's safe and we believe it's working, and just ask for volunteers to move forward and just do it at $30 a pop for X number of people?
Well, I do, I totally hear you. And my feeling as a person who develops vaccines is there are issues with understanding what the long-term side effects of these are. We have followed patients out as long as 10 years without seeing any untoward side effects. But you don't want to inject someone where there's absolutely no benefit whatsoever.
Sure.
And we would all love to be able to prove the point. And it would very much benefit the entire community. I mean, I'm representing one person who's done cancer vaccine research my whole life, but there are dozens and dozens and dozens of us across the United States and wonderful vaccines out there. And like I say to people, there's not one vaccine, there's many. And
Yeah.
who's to say, like people say, for COVID, did you get Moderna? Did you get
Right.
this vaccine? Maybe we should alternate the two,
Right.
have different vaccines. I mean, maybe that's the same thing with breast cancer vaccines. You get one, then you get another. The more antigens you're exposed to, the better. So the more vaccines we bring to market where we know there's some level of efficacy,
Mhm.
I think is the best. So I am a believer that it would be best to show that there is an effect. Now, how do you do that? Do you ask for volunteers? And there still is data collection.
Yeah. I
I
mean, it's
mean,
not free,
right,
even if
it's
people
not free.
volunteer, but certainly cuts things down. I mean, what
Right.
do they do for flu vaccines now? I mean, they certainly don't test that for 10 years.
Yeah, but they went through infectious vaccines are easier because the infection comes fast.
I see.
It's kind of like COVID, everyone's getting infected. You go in, you vaccinate an uninfected population, and then you test for COVID and see who ends up getting it and who doesn't. With cancer, it's a little bit different. But I totally agree with you. I do think we need to think out of the box. And I
Yeah,
do think we need to talk to regulatory agencies and governmental agencies because I do think the government is going to have to be involved,
yeah,
just like the government has been involved with every infectious disease vaccine.
for sure.
Most of industry was not interested in those either, right? Because they're cheap and inexpensive and they're not that much of a market. And
Right.
it's going to be the same thing with cancer vaccines as well.
Right.
So, how do we mobilize? And I do think patients have a lot to say about this.
Yeah.
We've have vaccinated more than 600 patients
Mm-hmm.
at the University of Washington with a variety of
Wow.
cancer vaccines over the years. We have used peptide vaccines, protein vaccines, until we finally come up with a formulation that really is generating high levels of immune responses. This new nucleic acid based technology, we've really come a long way with cancer vaccines, and they are non toxic. And we do have signs that patients benefit. I mean, people have done meta analyses looking at cancer vaccines over the years, even with older technologies, and there appears to be a benefit. So I do think there's a burden of proof that is plenty there to suggest that this is a field ripe for both financial and intellectual investment by many groups of people, including the government and including regulatory agencies, patient advocacy groups, and scientific organizations.
I know that the UK, they came out and said that they had a big goal. The UK government said that they were going to vaccinate, can't remember how many thousand of people within
10,000.
10,000 people within 5 years. And that was a couple years ago.
They're way ahead of their goal.
They're way ahead of their goal. And so are we learning, is there an exchange of information? Are we learning from their results as well?
We definitely will learn from their results. But they do believe that cancer vaccines is the next big immune therapy. Mm-hmm. And yeah, they're investing in it quite heavily. Their system, though, is really quite different in the fact that it's centralized, and they have a handful of regional locations that are set up for this, and, a very centralized data collection. So they're set up to be able to monitor this and really collect a lot of information.
I think it speaks to what you were saying earlier, that we kind of need government involvement, and
Right.
we need to be working on this as a team to really move it forward, because it's not a small thing. It's not a small.
But if you look at the scientific publications, the number of vaccines developed, and there have been publications on this, the United States is clearly the world's leader in cancer vaccine development. I don't know how long we'll stay the world's leader, and I wish that we would be the ones that get cancer vaccines clearly over the finish line. But we are the world's leader in cancer vaccine science. There's no doubt about that.
So I think what's being brought to light is that there, in terms of innovation and the thinking, there's a lot of that's coming from the United States. When it comes to operational behavior, a centralized system similar to the UK provides a little more ease in implementing a broad scale effort to get people vaccinated and to collect the data on what's happening.
Right. And a government will that, I think preventative health care, or this concept that cancer vaccines to prevent disease recurrence, or mutational based vaccines to really try to personalize cancer care on a big scale, was something that they wanted to tackle as a government, as a national health service.
Sure. Well, ultimately it should end up saving a great deal of money if we can prevent cancer recurrence and prevent cancer altogether. I have noticed a lot of clinical trials that are combining cancer vaccines with traditional or standard chemotherapy agents. I'm wondering why that is happening. If you can create a vaccine that is able to really stimulate the immune system. What benefit is the chemotherapy offering in combination, and what combinations have been working?
I think the combination of a vaccine with chemotherapy is relatively new. And, previously I would never have dreamed of giving a vaccine in combination with chemotherapy. Our group has always given vaccines in the adjuvant setting to prevent disease recurrence once chemotherapy had been given and cancer was no longer evident. But we and others have done a lot of research to show, number one, chemotherapy itself is immunogenic. So there are very specific chemotherapies that actually stimulate the immune system. And number two, the immune system can synergize with chemotherapy. And an active immune system can actually help chemotherapy work better. Specifically, we published a paper that demonstrated that adding a vaccine to chemotherapy, when the vaccine was generating those kind of killer T cells, this type 1 T cell response, could reverse chemo resistance and make the tumor resensitize to chemotherapy, and even make the tumor resensitize to hormonal therapy.
Oh, interesting.
So we're just launching 2 phase 2 clinical trials, probably early this summer. One vaccinating patients with triple negative breast cancer on chemotherapy in the metastatic setting, and one vaccinating hormone receptor positive patients in the metastatic setting on either hormonal therapy or capecitabine to kind of test those hypotheses.
Interesting. And is it the same effect, meaning does with a checkpoint inhibitor as well as with chemotherapy, meaning does the checkpoint inhibitor work with a vaccine the same sort of way where the immune system kind of gets woken up?
Well, it's interesting. Immune checkpoint inhibitors seem to work better with chemotherapy. And it's probably because the patients who respond better to immune checkpoint inhibitors are the same ones that have those highly mutated tumors. So they probably already have those type 1 T cells in their tumor. With combining immune checkpoints with vaccines, there have been a few trials combining the immune checkpoint inhibitors with mutation-based vaccines. That seems to be very effective. And in fact, it seems to be more effective to give mutation-based vaccines with immune checkpoint inhibitors. There have been a few clinical trials looking at those non-mutated proteins given with immune checkpoint inhibitors, and they haven't really been designed to look at clinical outcome. They're more looking at immunologic outcomes. So they haven't been as focused on clinical outcome as those mutated antigen vaccines. I hope we see more clinical trials of immune checkpoint inhibitors being given with vaccines. But you have to be able to get the immune checkpoint inhibitors from the companies, or, if you're working with tumors where immune checkpoint inhibitors are indicated so that they're just part of standard of care, those tumors are generally inherently immunogenic. So I would like to see tumors that aren't really inherently immunogenic to see whether we could use vaccines to make them more immunogenic.
That's really interesting, because one of the questions I wanted to ask you was if you could design any clinical trial today, what would you design? Is that what you would put together, or is there something else that intrigues you even more?
Oh, a lot of things intrigue me. I think right now, with my current understandings, I've got all the clinical trials designed that I want to design. I mean, we're given the vaccines with chemotherapy. We're launching the phase 2 that's looking at presenting disease recurrence to follow the phase 1s that we've done. We have clinical trials going to immunize patients for prevention, for ductal carcinoma in situ. We've got quite a few clinical trials going, but we're doing quite a bit of work with modulation of the gut microbiome. And so we're not yet at the point where we're ready to design a clinical trial for that yet, but that's what's intriguing me most, just because we're chomping at the bit to get that clinical trial design, but I need a little bit more data out of the lab first.
Well, it's a very interesting topic area for me. I've been fascinated with watching the results of information coming forward, showing that the gut microbiome and its health, what bacteria are present in the gut microbiome, how those bacteria influence the immune system and influence our body's ability to leverage these immunotherapy drugs to their best effect and get rid of cancer. So, can you tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for to see whether, whether it makes sense to move forward with a vaccine in combination with some gut microbiome work?
Yeah, the microbiome, I think, is really at the beginnings of our understanding of it. Everyone's looking at individual organisms and how they might influence how the immune system works, certain microorganism interactions with specific cells. We have identified some T cells that become peripheralized in the blood that can be immunosuppressive, and altering the microbiome can decrease these cells and make your immune system work better. So we're in the process right now of figuring out how long we can suppress these cells, what organisms we need to feed to suppress these cells, and whether, if we feed these organisms over an extended period of time, do they cause any other problems in the gut? Mm-hmm. But in mouse models, they can really stimulate the immune system, make you respond better to vaccines, even slow tumor growth, just by manipulating the microbiome. So I think this is a big area of research, and it may be an area that holds a lot of promise, again, with very little toxicity as an adjunct to other forms of immune therapy.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with how we are evolving the science of understanding cancer. And what I mean by that is it started out where we were looking at just the most toxic drugs possible, these chemotherapies that were just systemic bombs that went off and killed so many things, good, bad, everything. And now we're coming to this place where we're understanding that we can't compete with the body. The body itself is so efficient and good at cleaning up cancer cells. How do we harness what it does, right, and try to upregulate it so that it works even better, right?
Yes.
And that seems to be the case for these cancer vaccines and for what's happening with the gut microbiome and having a really healthy gut microbiome.
I agree. And I think we're very, very close to being able to put all this together and make it work. And clearly, some of the data that we're seeing published by groups, I always say where there's smoke, there's fire. When there's one paper once a year, you're like, okay, what's that about? But when there's like one paper every month that's coming out, from a different group about another vaccine,
yeah,
you know that there's something there.
There's something there. Yeah, it's super excited. You've dedicated so much of your career to cancer vaccines. Was there a moment, like a scientific or personal, that made you believe that there was a future in this type of cancer treatment?
Yeah, there was. One of our very first vaccine trials, we did it. It was on HER2/neu. It was with fragments, chemically peptide fragments that we just had chemically made and put into vaccines. It was the first vaccine thing we ever did. And it was a lot of patients. It was about 60 patients. It was a very big study back in those days. And it was really just trying to see if we could immunize patients against a self-antigen after like 7 years of figuring out how to do it in mice. And after the study was over, and we learned a lot about how to measure immunity, how to immunize patients, we identified that the vaccine caused what was called epitope spreading, which meant inflammatory immune response that we caused generated like a limited autoimmunity at the site of the tumor, and they developed new immunity to other antigens in their tumor, which turned out to be an important finding. We just went on to look at other ways to deliver the antigen, other adjuvants. We just steamrolled forward, right? Until one day, was years after this first trial was done, I got a phone call from a doctor. And the doctor said to me, I have a patient of yours on your very first trial, and I wanted to call you to see if you gave booster vaccines. And I go, what are you talking about? And he said, this lady came to you for your vaccine study, and she had a leptomeningeal metastases, and she got your vaccine, and over time it went away. And now she's 10 years out with her HER2/neu positive disease, and she's no evidence of disease. And this is before Herceptin. And I'm just wondering whether we can give her another vaccine, because every time she comes in, I'm worried about her. And so I was, I'm an oncologist, so I'm like, wow, I didn't even think to look to see how these people were doing. So I immediately went to the team and I said, go back to that original phase 1 study and go, how many people are still alive?
Right.
And like 70% of them were still alive.
Yes.
And we were flabbergasted. So the team started calling people to see how they were doing, and they were doing really, really well. So it was then that we realized maybe we had something going on here. And we started really focusing our efforts a lot more in a focused effort into driving this forward more clinically, not so much messing around with, we were doing all kinds of different crazy stuff.
So you saw the patient, the real tangible patient benefit. And
Right.
so you started pushing to get more patients that benefit.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as a patient, that's what we'd love to hear.
Yeah. Get out of the mouse. Stop with the mice already.
That's right. Enough with the mice. Let's get this into people. And I want to go back to a question area that we started to touch on, because I know there are so many patients out there with so many different variations of this disease. So, for example, I know someone personally who was diagnosed with breast cancer that was a de novo, meaning, there was no tumor that they found, and it had spread right out of the gate. She had no prior breast cancer occurrence, and it's in her bone marrow. So you said that, you can create this immune response, and it's systemic, it's in the whole body. So Can you just talk a little bit to those patients that I and friends of mine who have brain metastasis and maybe bone marrow metastasis and these metastases to different places? Like, does it matter where in your body it is? Will it be as effective as, will it be effective anywhere?
Well, the beauty of the immune system, like I said, compared to chemotherapy, is that T cells, which is what we're trying to stimulate, specifically cytotoxic T cells and type 1 CD4 T cells, can crawl out of the bloodstream and go anywhere to any tissue. They can home to tissue. That's what they do. They can go through the blood-brain barrier. They originate in the bone marrow. That's home to them, so they can go there, to the lymph nodes, everywhere. Now, will they be functional if you have metastases all over your body? The more tumor you have on board, the less functional they will be, right?
Yep.
It's kind of like you have the army already in France and you've got one boat arriving to Normandy. So the key would be, and what I often tell people when they call me on the phone saying they're looking for a vaccine, is that you've got to debulk the disease first. We've got to get it as low as it can go, preferably to the point where we can barely see it.
Yep.
But if it's all over, the immune system won't have much of a chance because the disease is growing too fast. It's kind of like when you have pneumonia and you can barely breathe and you go to the emergency room. If the emergency room doc came at you with the Pneumovax vaccine and said, this is what we're going to give you, you'd probably be calling a lawyer, like this is malpractice. They give you antibiotics first.
Right.
To try to stop things, and then your immune system will kick in and clean up everything. That's what we're trying to do. So if we can get control over the disease, then we have time. Mm-hmm. And breast cancer generally is a slow-growing tumor, so there would be time to give people vaccination. But in the metastatic setting, what we're trying to do is work with different ways to immunize that may get the immune system tweaked faster. Because it's different if I take, a stage 2 patient whose relapse is going to come over like a 5-year period of time versus a patient with metastatic disease, and this is her second-line therapy, and she's been put into remission. I have to get that immune response up high much faster, Yeah. So we're still looking at vaccine technologies that can get the immune system up faster, quicker.
Okay.
Than the typical vaccine.
Got it. So if you were to just describe in a nutshell, the best time for a cancer patient to be considering the cancer vaccine, it sounds like it is after you have debulked any disease. So you've gone through maybe initial therapy, which could be chemotherapy or other, and you get to a place of perhaps remission or close to remission. Maybe there's just 1 or 2 spots hanging around, but you've been able to fight that battle first. Taking the vaccine, getting into a trial or working on getting the vaccine at that point would be your strongest point. You wouldn't want to wait till the cancer came back. You'd want to do it right away after you've debulked the cancer, before you have more problems down the pike. You don't want to wait till it's, the last resort. You want to do it when you're at your strongest, when your immune system is still really strong.
I agree.
Okay.
I think anyone who's got breast cancer, they should, the minute you get breast cancer, you're screwed up for a long, long time. But once you start treatment and get into treatment and you get done with chemotherapy. I think everyone should take a look at clinical trials. Just look to see what's out there. Get familiar with clinical trials. And if there's something out there that looks interesting to you, you should do it.
Yeah. I am a huge fan. I absolutely agree with you. And I'll tell you, I have great frustration because most offices doctors' offices, oncologists don't bring the clinical trials to the patients at that point in time.
Yeah.
So, part of what I am trying to do with this podcast is to educate patients and to help them see all the options that are in front of them, including clinical trials on an early stage. And so I'm a huge fan of what you just said, which is okay, it may take your breath away when you get diagnosed, and you may have a scramble with getting started on medication to control your disease. Do that. Go after that standardized care and get yourself stable. But then start looking and start looking to see what is out there for yourself. You don't Clinical trials are for now. They're not for last resort, or not only
Right.
for last resort.
I agree. And there is this website, clinicaltrials.gov, and everyone is like, oh, it's the world's worst website. I don't know why people say that. I mean, I go on it. It's not that bad. It gives you the most important thing, which is a phone number to call
Right.
and talk to a person.
Yes.
I mean, it gives you the title of a clinical trial that you can understand what it is and look at some eligibility criteria, and then it gives you a phone number.
Right.
So I don't know why people are trying to. I know groups that are redesigning it, making their own clinicaltrials.gov on their own webpage.
Yeah.
I'm like, guys, I don't think there's anything wrong with this.
Yeah, I hear you.
Not that hard to use.
It is the basic information. You can type in breast cancer, this is what you're looking for trials on. I mean, it is doable. I will say, for people who get overwhelmed, the American Cancer Society has just recently launched a program where they have navigators who can help you with this. And so you can always try clinicaltrials.gov. And if you feel overwhelmed, then you might go to the American Cancer Society and look at their program and see if that provides some further assistance. Yeah. But I do agree with you. I think that would be great to be able to get more people looking and interested in clinical trials earlier. With that said, I just want to differentiate, since some of these trials are with chemotherapies, and we just talked about trying to get yourself as strong and healthy as possible for the vaccine. It seems like there's two maybe camps there. One, which is maybe these chemotherapies are sensitizing yourself and they're immunogenic, as you were saying earlier. So therefore, they might be helpful to the vaccine. But if they're also harmful to us systemically, how does that work? Are we still figuring this out, whether it's better to be post chemotherapy and strong as possible, or can chemotherapy help?
Yeah, we're still figuring it out.
Okay. And for cancer patients that have had early diagnoses, so let's say they are stage 0, 1, 2, they're early on, and they currently have no evidence of disease. And maybe they have put this behind them. They're thinking, I don't want to think about this anymore. The doctor said it may never come back. He said I'm probably cured. They treated me with curative intent. There are a lot of those people out there. Should they be thinking about this vaccine?
I think that there are very few clinical trials available for that group of people. And the reason why gets back to the issue of the trial would have to be like a 25-year trial to prove that the vaccine works. And at this time, To get a vaccine approved, you need to show a difference in overall survival. So that would be like thousands of patients of that type being enrolled in a randomized fashion. So the earlier the disease you have, the better the survival you have, the least likely there's going to be a trial available for you.
I see. I got it. So if you had to characterize the type of patient that should be looking at cancer vaccines right now, how would you describe them?
If your doctor told you you have a higher risk of relapse, there's probably a trial available for you. If you had neoadjuvant chemotherapy and at the time of your definitive surgery, you still had leftover tumor, meaning you did not have a complete pathologic complete response, there's probably a vaccine trial open somewhere for you. So anything that would make you at a higher risk of disease recurrence, there's probably a vaccine trial somewhere open for you.
Very interesting. And one other question I had was, well, now it flew out of my head. It was about brain metastases. Bear with me 1 minute. It just flew right out of my head. Gosh, can't remember it. I was like, oh, I know, I have to ask this for my friend Mary, and then I totally lost it. Gosh, she's in your trial in Buffalo, or in a trial in Buffalo, Roswell, for brain metastasis. Oh, that's the question. Okay, here we go. Can you tell me, I've read that immunotherapy drugs can take a little longer to work. I watched a show that explained that early stages of immunotherapies, they didn't even think that they were working, and you had to wait longer for the reaction to occur. Is that true of the cancer vaccine? And if so, how long does it usually take before they see it actually making a difference?
That is very true. Immune therapies take longer in the sense that you need a length of time for your immune system to get revved up. We give 3 vaccines over 3 months, like you'd get a COVID vaccine once a month for 3 months. And then we give a booster 3 months after that, and then 3 months after that. And each time we give the booster, it makes the immune response higher and higher. That's what we know about driving the immune response higher. How that translates clinically, we still are testing. But we know with continued boosters over the course of a year, we can make the immune response even higher than we could over the 3 initial vaccinations we give. And the more immunity you have, the better, of course, in terms of the number of T cells being able to attack the tumor.
That's fascinating. So, do you find a fall off after a certain period of time? Do you see that, if you were given a booster at 6 months, 1 year later, 2 years later, if you haven't had any further booster, does the immunity remain constant, or does it dissipate?
We're studying that right now, but other people have studied and shown that the immunity does fall off. So where we are right now is trying to figure out what our booster schedule would be. But people will definitely end up getting boosters as they go forward. So you would end up having a vaccine regimen, not just 3 vaccines and then you're done for life. You'll have to have some interval where you'd come back and have repeat immunizations.
Interesting. Okay. If cancer vaccines train the immune system like a coach trains an athlete, what is something most people don't realize about how trainable the immune system is?
I think most people don't realize we don't have a good way to measure how healthy your immune system is. I think most people don't realize when they say, how can I improve my immune system? We really don't have much of an idea about how you can improve your immune system. And when people eat all this stuff or take all these pills or do all this, whatever they do to boost their immune system, as someone who spends most of my waking hours thinking about the immune system, I have no idea what they're doing.
Well, how do you measure the immune response? Like you've said, when you give the vaccines, you see an increase
So
response
I
to the immune system.
can,
How do you measure that?
I generate a vaccine to stimulate a specific T cell response. So it's easy for me to measure that T cell. When someone says to me, I want to boost my immune system, or breast cancer affects my immune system, or some people will measure general immune function, I have no idea what that means or how they're measuring it or when they take their measurements.
Mm-hmm. So there's no standard. It's not like,
Right.
so for example, you can get a lipid profile and find out your cholesterol and your HDL and your LDL and all of this other data. So do we not have equivalent data points for an immune system?
We do not have a way to measure immune health.
Okay.
We do not have a blood test for a healthy immune system.
Are there markers that exist within the immune system that might give you an idea of who would respond well to the cancer vaccine?
There's bunches and bunches and bunches of markers. There are so many markers that you can measure.
I see.
That it would make your head spin.
I see. So it's not something that's really within the cancer person's grasp. Because I know what you're saying. Cancer patients are always trying to shore up their immune system. And you're right. There's lots of products out there that talk about improving your immune system.
Don't buy them.
Don't buy them. So none of it works.
I don't know if it works, but it doesn't make sense to me.
So
and
there's
I think
no way
about this all the time.
I see. So there's no way
I
to
would
measure
say, if you were going to do something to improve your immune system, eat a lot of fruits and vegetables with a lot of fiber, and exercise daily.
Agreed. I've been working with Dr. Katie Schmitz from the University of Pittsburgh on her quest to make exercise a part of standard care for all cancer patients by 2029.
Yes.
And I think it's a big goal, and I think it's super important. And I hadn't thought about its relationship to the immune system, but I think that's what you're alluding to, which is exercise, we know, has positive benefits that you must see in the lab that benefit the immune system.
Yes.
Got it. So healthy eating and lots of exercise.
Agreed.
Okay. That's great. Well, I think that this has been fantastic. I really want to thank you so much for coming today and for your time. I appreciate everything that you've shared with us. I think this is going to educate a lot of cancer patients and make them more interested in the cancer vaccine and help them better understand if it's something that's right for them. So I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks very much. There are many, many cancer vaccine trials. It's one of the most fast growing area of clinical trials on clinicaltrials.gov. So there's probably a cancer vaccine trial very close to your house.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome. I'm going to work on that. Can you tell us, is there a place that cancer patients could go to if they want to, show support for cancer vaccine trials?
There is an organization that was recently started called the Cancer Vaccine Coalition that is trying to organize people to raise awareness and funds for cancer vaccine clinical trials specifically, and to get more clinical trials going for cancer vaccines across the United States. So that is definitely a place to investigate.
Terrific. We will give that link, which is cancervaccinecoalition.org. We will put that in the show notes, and anybody who's interested in donating to cancer vaccine trials can go there and do so. Thank you so much. And now, an important announcement. All the information that was provided today was for educational purposes only. I'm a patient, just like you. I am not a licensed or accredited physician, therapist, or clinical researcher. All information provided is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, therapist, nutritionist, or any other qualified healthcare professional.